I suppose the work here is looking at the various options, and obviously we do not know what the EU is going to look for, and everybody is looking at, you know, the north being a back door into Britain, and the issue around the common travel area and how that would be sustained. But of course the EU's concern is they don't want us to be a back door from the UK into the EU, and there was a number of issues in relation to that raised at the House of Lords, where Mike Nesbitt brought up the issue of the border being in the middle of the Irish Sea. Now, I brought that up yesterday when we had meetings with the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee from Westminster, and they already have Operation Gull in place in Northern Ireland, where they have immigration officers who are checking people going from Derry, Belfast and Larne into Britain. And formalising that would mean that, and having a standardised check so that everybody leaving the island of Ireland would be treated and would be checked for immigration, would mean that there would be no necessity for any checks on people going over and back across the border. And, you know, Mike Nesbitt having proposed that, and these are all different scenarios based on what the EU is going to propose. Of course, also in the House of Lords, it was proposed, and it was reported in The Guardian, that we would be putting in UK immigration officers in our ports in terms of an all-islands approach, which I think is unacceptable. And I don't know, is that anything that has been explored by the British authorities with yourselves? Obviously, an unwelcomed, I think, a piece of kite flying. And then it goes down to the other, and like in terms of, there was a professor who talked about Protocol 19 and 20, which would allow the common travel area. Doesn't think it's incompatible with EU law. And have you any views on that? And are we effectively going to end up having to enforce UK immigration law and EU immigration law from people who are entering and leaving this island? But ultimately, I think, and I thought your figures are interesting. We're working on it in the Good Friday Agreement Implementation Committee, and the difficulty with getting figures in relation to who's travelling over and back across the border. We would all hear figures of 20, 30, 40,000 people going over and back across the border every day for work and study. When you look at the census results from 2011, which I'm sure you have, it's 14,751. And then when you look at the figures which you gave to us, which I'd be very interested in getting, when we looked for research in relation to those who are leaving the island of Ireland, going to Britain every day, who are Irish passport holders, it was 5,722. You know, so I suppose public policy, our position is based on the facts. And when you go, our first wish is status quo, because what we have is what we'd like to retain. Then your next position is, can we maintain the common travel area with whatever restrictions the EU might put on it, but doesn't impinge on people? And then, if that's not possible, then can we make sure that the border between the north and the south remains open, and that all checks are between the island of Ireland? That requires Britain to reinstate what they did between 1939, which they don't overemphasise. They say for a period from 1939. That went on all the way to 1952, you know, and they imposed what was effectively immigration controls between Northern Ireland and Britain. So I suppose getting the hard facts and then having a position based on that is the key to the common travel. And then the practical question of this, like we all travel over and back between Ireland and Britain, and then people who are travelling in from France into Britain, who are in Schengen, practically, what is the difference between somebody who is arriving in from France today, arriving in from France into Britain? What passport controls do they have to go through? And what's the difference between, like, us leaving Ireland and going into Britain? And if they said, well, from here on in, there is no more common travel area, is it a simple matter of you're producing your passport? How much, in the absence of the difference today between Ireland not in Schengen, France is in Schengen, what is the difference the way citizens are treated, and is it such a loss in practical terms? I say that compared to the people who travel over and back across the border every day. Because, you know, when Britain, and they said yesterday at the meeting with the British members of Parliament, they couldn't possibly formalise that immigration control check that they now have in place in Derry, Belfast and Ireland. They've arrested 792 people in one calendar year who were trying to get into Britain through Northern Ireland, into the Republic, over the border, through Northern Ireland. Once the word gets out that everybody who is trying to get into Britain through Northern Ireland will get caught in Derry, Belfast, Ireland, there's no possible way across the border, then nobody's going to bother trying to get into Britain through that route. But what they seem to be saying is we might put immigration or seamless or frictionless controls on the border. The only people that affects is people who are going over and back and going about their daily business on this island, and to no positive outcome. So I suppose the key element is, in relation to Protocol 19 and 20, is that the case, and that, you know, our common travel area doesn't affect EU law? And then finally, you know, we're having a big battle over the common travel area. How different is a person from France going into Britain today being treated than a person from Ireland? Is it, you know, is it worth this huge battle that we're trying to have, compared to the most important battle is making sure that we don't have border checks on this island? And like, when we try to emphasise this to people here and in America and elsewhere, public representatives, congressmen and members of Parliament, say you put up a border checkpoint and you have, it might be, you know, electronic, it gets shot. Then somebody has to put a fence around it. Then that fence gets taken down. Then somebody has to put a soldier to mind it. Then the soldier gets shot. That's how it escalates. And that's something that we're trying to convey to our European colleagues, that they don't quite understand. This is not Norway and Sweden. This is a post-conflict society that isn't out of a conflict as yet.
If I could just pick up on the questions around Protocol 19 and 20 and Schengen and the Common Travel Area, and you'll have to excuse me if it's slightly long-winded, but it's best to explain it from a historical perspective. And first of all, before I start on that, the question about what's the position of Irish people in UK post-Brexit is really a question for the British to decide. Now, what they have said is they want to maintain the Common Travel Area and, by implication, therefore maintain all the rights and things. But it is purely the decision of the UK. It's not necessarily part of the negotiations. There are negotiations about reciprocal rights. But the Common Travel Area is effectively, if you view it if you look at Ireland in 1922, it meant Irish people could go to Britain. So there was free travel and a right to work, if we just pick on those 2 points. When we joined the European Union in 1973, it gave us certain rights of free movement. It meant we could move to France to look for a job in certain specific conditions. But it didn't have free movement in the sense there was still border controls. There was border controls between Ireland and France, and there was border controls between France and Germany. So there wasn't free movement within Europe, even though you had certain rights of movement and a right to work and things like that. You couldn't just cross a border. So it was only with the Treaty of Lisbon that they introduced the Schengen idea, and that, in one context, it removed the border controls. So after the Schengen area was introduced, a person in France can cross into Germany and there's no border controls. And in a sense, that's mirrored in the Common Travel Area. There's no border controls between ourselves and the UK, and we have the right to work, and the EU kind of arrangements kind of mirror that. At the time when it was included in the Treaty of Lisbon, there was a question for Ireland and the UK to decide whether they want to effectively abandon the Common Travel Area and join Schengen or not, and the decision was that at that stage we didn't want to join Schengen. And what Protocol 19 and 20 specifically said is that Ireland and Britain can stay outside the Schengen area and can have their own border controls. So we have the Schengen area and we have the Common Travel Area. They're very similar in what they do, but they form it. So as a result, when we travel to France, we have to show our passport because we're entering Schengen. Once you're in France, you can move around between the Schengen countries. And similarly, when a French person travels to Ireland or to Britain, they have to show their passport. But they have a right of entry, but they still have to show their passport. We had our legal people look at Protocol 1920, and their advice to us is that it stands. So even though the UK are leaving the European Union, Ireland still has a right to have its own border controls separate to Schengen. And we have had no view from Brussels saying that that's not correct. So if that continues, that means we can decide what border controls we want. European people still have a right to travel here, but we have a right to check what kind of passport we control. So that's really how the situation hopefully will maintain that way. So as Mr. Walker said, we can't be in Schengen and the common travel area because there has to be a border between the two. At the moment, we're in the common travel area and the European Union, and it meant we have reciprocal rights. So Irish and UK people in each country have the rights under the common travel area, but they also have the rights they have under the European Union area. When the problem arises when UK leaves, the rights of Irish people in the UK will be the rights we have under the common travel area, but not the European Union. And similarly, the rights of UK people in Ireland will depend on the common travel area rights rather than the European Union things. But European Union citizens will still have exactly the same rights in Ireland as they did before, and there'll be no change there. So there's a logic that feeds from that goes into all the other questions about things. But I said, to sum up, the view is, yes, Article 1920 means Ireland can stay outside the Schengen area and can have its own border controls, and that would apply to border controls or no border controls with the UK. And that doesn't cause any problems to the Schengen countries because we're outside Schengen, we're not a backdoor into them because they can have border controls with us.
Thanks very much for your detailed response in relation to Protocol 19 and 20. And it is, it requires a detailed response in terms of its complexity nature. I suppose, so it goes back to this fundamental question from what you've outlined, is that the Schengen countries, the EU countries, are not concerned about what happens between the north and the south of Ireland. Whether or not controls are put there is entirely at the will of the British government. So if they want to it's up to them if they want to put back in the border. It's not EU. It's of no concern to the EU because we're outside Schengen, which happens to be in this circumstances something that is to our advantage in terms of without that we would have to impose the border. Would that be a correct interpretation of the situation as it stands at the moment?
Thank you very much, Senator Teddy, to reply.
On that particular point, that would be clearly a breach of the common travel area. The British government is completely committed, as we are, that the common travel area would be retained. I mean, in theory, of course, the British government could decide when they're gone to impose whatever controls it likes, wherever it likes, on their side of the border, whether in the mainland UK or in the north. But as I say, that's, our British government, the Prime Minister has been abundantly clear about that. They are committed to the common travel area. And in I think the 11 points they've made, what they want to see post-Brexit, they want to see the common travel area remain. So I think we have to take them at their word on that they wouldn't wish to do that. But you're right in the sense that if they did want to impose a border control somewhere, that would be a sovereign matter for them to do so. Did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, just to add to that, yes, as far as border controls, our view would be that the other EU countries have no particular interest because we don't. The border controls that we have between Ireland and the UK won't affect them because they have border controls with us. Now, what you have to remember, the common travel area extends beyond mere border controls, and that's where there may be a mixture of rights. But as far as pure border controls are, we don't think that other member states will have a big concern about this, but it's the other rights that are associated with that may cause problems.
And forgive me for labouring on the point. The very clear focus in terms of the Good Friday Agreement Committee is the issue of people going over and back across the border. And what you pointed out quite clearly is the EU don't have any real issue because we're outside it, and they're not going to request us, they're not going to require us. And that had been a kind of a concern that had been raised at the committee, and we couldn't quite get a clear answer, and I think you've answered that quite clearly now, is that the EU aren't going to be asking us to put Gardaí at the border, to say, or immigration officers at the border, for people coming in. It's the only people who are going to be asking for that will be British, if they wish. It's up to them, of course.
Yeah, I don't speak for the European Union. That would be my view. That there is no political or practical reason why they would,
or legal,
why they would have an interest in it.